Welcome everyone, and thanks so much for joining us today at our 19th PTRC Fireside Chat. Just to give you a quick introduction before we move on to introducing the panel, we are a training company based in the UK which specialises in the training of transport planners, engineers, designers and placemakers. We also run a conference every year called the Transport Practitioners Meeting, in which call for papers is currently open and delegates' places are available to book. So once we kick off, I will put further information into the chat about that. PTRC is a part of the Chartered Institute of Logistics and Transport, the membership organisation for professionals leading the movement of goods and people. Since April 2020, we've had some amazing and insightful conversations during these fireside chats, and I'm really looking forward to today's talk on getting inclusive about transport. Please remember to leave your questions for the panel in the comments. It would also be great to hear where everybody's joining from. So please just put your location down in the chat. And now I'll hand over to Glenn, who'll be your chair for the discussion. Thanks, Glenn.
That's great. Thanks, Shania. And hello, everyone. I have to say it's been a little while, but welcome back to the PTRC Fireside Chat series and our latest event, as Shania says, number 19. My name's Glenn Lyons, and I'm the Mott MacDonald Professor of Future Mobility at UWE Bristol in the UK. I'm also the current president of the Chartered Institution of Highways and Transportation, an institution in which equality, diversity and inclusion has an important place. Thanks ever so much for joining us, and I really hope you enjoy this session. As Shania said, please be sure to get involved by using the chat bar to raise issues and questions that you have. The recording, including the chat bar, all being well, will be available afterwards on YouTube. Today is an important opportunity to look inside our minds and at how our brains work, and at what this means for a diverse society in which we each have different talents and experience different opportunities and challenges. One of my climate heroes, Greta Thunberg, is autistic or living with autism. Many well-known people are neurodivergent. Take a look online for yourself. While never diagnosed, Albert Einstein is one. Elon Musk is another. Greta has referred to her neurodivergence as her superpower. And it seems that there are many neurodivergent people out there making a big impact on society. There may also be much untapped potential for neurodivergence in a neurotypical society, where those who don't fit the typical mold face struggles and discrimination. I'm on my own personal learning journey with a lot of things as I get older. And indeed, as I get older, I appreciate more and more the significance of the terms lifelong learning and continuing professional development. With diagnoses of neurodivergence of family members, I'm on a learning journey about neurodivergence. And therefore, I'm really privileged to be able to welcome and talk with today's amazing panel of neurodivergent people who are also accomplished professionals in the transport sector. And I know that if your minds are open out there, you're set to learn a lot. We'll hear their opening remarks shortly, but a little more, if I may, by way of introduction. For those today who need a primer, let's just consider what the difference is between being neurotypical, neurodivergent, and neurodiverse. Neurodiversity encompasses us all. It's about how our brains work differently, affecting how we process information and how we behave. However, society has not been constructed to adequately accommodate neurodiversity, but instead favours certain brain types that have come to be called neurotypical. Social, educational and employment environments tend to favour people who are neurotypical. Some people, meanwhile, have conditions such as autism, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder or ADHD, dyspraxia, dyslexia, and many others. And if diagnosed with one or more of these, they are considered neurodivergent. And there are a lot of neurodivergent people out there, perhaps 1 in 7 or 1 in 5 of us. In a neurotypical oriented society, neurodivergence can be a strength and or a weakness, as we're going to hear from our panel. As I've taken a closer interest in neurodiversity and talked more about it, I've begun to wonder about myself. As you listen to today's discussion, particularly if you don't have a diagnosis for neurodivergence, you may find a mental checklist starts to form. Yep, that sounds familiar. Yep, I do that. Yep, that's me. Let me illustrate. Jenny on our panel, in a brilliant blog, I must say, wrote a list of characterizing features of neurodivergent people, including unlikely to be pulled into groupthink, may challenge assumptions, strongly justice-oriented. Yep, yep, yep. Neurodivergence can also affect the need for sensory stimulation. Heavy metal provides lots of that. Yep, a picture starts to form, you understand. In a world full of challenges affecting us all in different ways, it surely makes sense to make more sense of each other so we can work to accommodate, celebrate, and benefit from our differences rather than let them be a source of misunderstanding and division. We may or may not find ourselves in our conversation today saying a lot about transport per se. We'll see. But I wanted to note that all of us in the conversation have a background in transport, so please bear that in mind. Nevertheless, I have no doubt at all that the transport sector would benefit from paying closer, open-minded attention to being more inclusive of the diversity of brain wiring that exists. We really need people in the sector who can make a big impact in a sector that's all too familiar with doing what it's always done and getting what it's always got. It was Michael Whitaker, the CILT Cymru chair, who refers to himself as a proud dyslexic and dyspraxic, who in a conversation with me gave rise to the idea for this fireside chat. In a response to my musings over transport futures, Michael said, and I found this quote wonderful, "Would be good to get a collection of neurodivergents in a room and let them loose on the task." Well, here we are, Michael. So I'll just end my introductory remarks with two quotes. The first is from Audre Lorde, a civil rights activist, who said, "It's not our differences that divide us, it's our inability to recognize, accept, and celebrate those differences." And the second is from Greta Thunberg. "No, autism is not a gift. For most, it's an endless fight against schools, workplaces, and bullies. But under the right circumstances, given the right adjustments, it can be a superpower." So with the scene setting complete, let's now move to hear from each of our panelists. Jenny, can I come to you first, please?
Thanks, Glenn. And the blog that Glenn was referring to was produced for the Association of Project Managers. So you can find it on their website if you would like to go and read. I did 3 in the series, and that's one of the 3. So I'm Jenny McLaughlin. I'm a project manager and the inclusion lead for solutions here at Heathrow Airport. I've been in aviation for over 20 years, and 17 of those have been at Heathrow. I was diagnosed with dyslexia when I was at primary school, and thought through all my life that most of the challenges I was experiencing was just purely down to the dyslexia. In my early 40s, after my son was diagnosed, I also recognised that I have ADHD as well. It was on a post-diagnosis course for my son's ADHD that I started, as Glenn said, to pick out the list of, oh, I do that, and that resonates with me. And it was the facilitator of the course who took me aside at one point and suggested that maybe I want to look into a diagnosis for myself. And probably the reason that I'm still at Heathrow and still in aviation is because it provides a particular environment, which means that I can swap from role to role multiple times, but stay within the industry. It gives my ADHD that ability to find the new challenge and excel at it without having to stick in one particular role. That means that I'm still working here. Many in it with ADHD find that they jump from company to find that engagement, but I found that here in Heathrow. And I reflected after my diagnosis on how I would like my children's experience in the workplace to be different than my own. I can't deny that the beginning of my career and the difficulties I had trying to fit into a box I didn't fit into left me with some quite considerable unhealthy coping strategies and some areas where my heavy masking caused significant burnout. I did not want that for my kids, and I don't want that for other people in the industry. So I started to look at what were the things that made me feel broken and what were the things that actually I was excelling at and others came to me to be able to do. And how could I spend the time creating that environment and that opportunity for others? So pulling together both my project management hat and my new increased hyper focus on inclusive design, I started to look at the ways that we could meet the needs of the many rather than meeting the needs of the few. And I believe that all of us on this call and all of us in our workplaces today have access needs. Each single one of us has an access need. It's just that some of us are lucky enough to not have to worry about whether those access needs are met or not. And other of us are forced into a scenario where we have to request them. And I think that inequality is what we're trying to look at, not just within the workplace, but also within the transport system itself. So we're being in a world where we are designed for the mythical average, and instead looking at a world and a project management and design principles where we can widen that lens and understand our own duty within the system to anticipate the different needs of others and create a more equitable, safe environment that has the bonus of reducing error, increasing performance, and including meeting everybody's well-being needs, I think definitely has a place where it benefits all.
That's wonderful. Thanks, Jenny. That's a really great start for us. I just wanted to pick out briefly, you've mentioned in there heavy masking. And whilst perhaps for many people on the call, that might seem kind of, I assume I know what you're meaning there. Could you just say a little bit more about the notion of masking, that sense of perhaps of impression management, as how I see it, pretending to be something you're not entirely the authentic you to fit in? Is that, could you say a little bit more about it and that sense of the toll it can take?
Yeah, so for me, and it will be different for different people, and they'll experience it differently and they'll explain it differently. But for me, my masking was due to having spent a long time in the education system and different careers to that point, being told that I wasn't quite good enough in certain areas, that I needed to speak less, that I needed to be less emotional, that I needed to be able to remember things in a different way. All of the different things under the executive functioning that I found difficult were things that I was being told within performance reviews, within job interviews, etc., I needed to get better at. So in order to match that box that I was being told I needed to fit in order to exceed in the workplace, I was masking the challenges I had and trying to present an image of the professionality I was being told I needed to meet.
Yeah.
Certain areas, like I have no idea what feminine wearing clothes, doing my hair and makeup is, just zero clue. But I was being told if I came to work and presented myself in a certain way, that was then indicating my professionalism to be able to exceed in the business. I'm not saying that I challenge that now, but what I do is ensure my own comfort in order that I can work in a workplace that means that I can be at my best, rather than feeling like I'm trying to be someone else that then is causing me to spend energy on something that doesn't necessarily need the energy to be spent on.
Yeah, thanks, Jenny. And just briefly, I'm imagining when you get home from if there's such a thing as a typical day and the mask is taken off, how does your kind of mind and body then recover behind the closed door? Is it a kind
I think unfortunately, from the length of time I've been doing it, it probably took a good 2-3 years of work to realize where the mask ended and where I began. And actually it took some coaching and some other sort of working on to be able to achieve that understanding of what was me and what was I trying to be and what was actually a good, healthy improvement in my work style. What were the reasonable expectations that I needed to meet? And I think from what it was like to go home, that over-peopling, that sensory overwhelm caused me to mean that by the time I got home, I had nothing for anybody else. I didn't have anything to do that relaxing, that resetting, that re-energizing that others may get from when they go home, because I was just so tired that it was just a matter of literally letting my sofa eat me and managing to make cornflakes, because that was the only thing I could prepare at that time.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Jenny. Thanks ever so much for sharing in that way. I suppose it's a reminder that, it's an issue in the workplace, but it doesn't end in the workplace, because of course those around you are making sense of, as you are, your environment and behaviours at home. Craig, I'm going to come to you in a moment. I just wanted to mention that we have another panel member who should be with us, and we hope she will be, Bonnie Price, who's the CEO of Young Rail Professionals, but frustratingly Bonnie's been having some technical problems with her headset. So if you can all cross your fingers out there in the audience, hopefully we will have Bonnie with us later. But in the meantime, Craig, over to you.
Thank you, Glenn. So I'm Craig Drury. I'm the head of strategic forecasting at the Department for Transport. My team deal with the national transport model and answer policy questions that ministers and others raise at the national level. Some of you might be familiar with the National Road Traffic Projections, which is one of the core offerings of my team. And previously, so I think actually following on from Jenny's comments, the point about lots of organisations. So if you look at my CV, I've worked for Highways Agency, so an arm's length government body. I've worked for Cambridgeshire and Oxfordshire County Council, so notice I picked shiny ones. I've worked for consultancies. I started my career as a structural engineer, and one of the key things that tipped my change was we'd got a competition to design a footbridge in London, and I spent 15 minutes of the presentation describing the transport connections of Canning Town and 5 minutes talking about the reinforced concrete bridge, at which point I kind of realised I was probably in the wrong profession. So yeah, and in terms of my neurodiverse journey, I was diagnosed coming up to 2 years ago. It was a surprise, almost 50th birthday present, and I guess I'm still working out what that means for me, because actually it's a complicated journey. It is a complicated journey. But following on from that, though, I'm now sitting on the committee at the DFT for its neurodiversity network, which is a staff network, and I'm fortunate to sit on the people committee for the DFT as a staff representative. So we're being able to kind of sprinkle in some of that diversity and inclusion thinking, and definitely cracking open the group think. So I think I can very much echo that neurodiversity point about getting towing the line's tricky for us. We kind of think for ourselves in general. But one of the things I kind of come to share with you is about the kind of the lived experience. So because I'm very much still in that at the moment. So the journey can be a little bit bumpy, and a lot of organizations don't really know about it yet. So by way of example, the first set of help I got from my employer was being referred to a dyslexia specialist. But unfortunately, I've got a diagnosis of ADHD. So that was kind of nearly right, but not quite. And I was given some really good, in fact, the opposite of what Jenny was talking about earlier. So it's an example of how neurotypical behavior is expected. So I was given good old-fashioned project management and time management training. So I should do the urgent, important things first. They hadn't thought that a career professional with 25 years working alongside engineers doing project management for major infrastructure projects might not actually already understand the challenges. And I could give great advice on how to manage your time, but the challenge is the executive function and executing it yourself. But in that kind of workplace adjustments kind of journey, there's some key things I've noticed already. So things like physical changes are relatively straightforward to achieve. So I have a sit-stand desk in the office. And again, my previous chief analyst once asked me, Craig, why haven't you unbooked a desk? And one of the workplace adjustments they gave me for my, so I commute a long way into the Department for Transport. So having a desk is quite important. And the workplace adjustment they gave me was to book me a desk all the time, which is great. Great, I've always got a desk. But instead of taking away the task of booking a desk, they give me the task of unbooking it. So, like I said, there's a learning journey in this kind of what happens once you've been diagnosed. What happens once you've been diagnosed? And also, one of my key observations is, for me, this was like this massive watershed moment of like, that explains all kinds of things. So my university lecturers at Bradford, in my final year, I wrote this amazing, no, I didn't write it. No, I'll rephrase that. I did some amazing work on the convergence of optimism algorithms in the presence of numerical noise. It was amazing. Me and Professor Toropov, we had a right good chat. I showed him all the results. He went, oh yeah, they're all a bit broken. This one's fine. All the useful stuff done. Then there's this task of actually writing it up. Well, I've got ADHD. It's not very exciting writing it up. And so I didn't quite write it up in time. So the university being very kind, and I thank Bradford a lot for its help, said, here, have 3 months to write it up. So I had the summer to do one thing, write up my final year thesis. And I get to the last minute. I've just bound this lovely document in leather with a gold edge down the side. I open the front page and it says abstract, and then it's blank. So, I mean, if I was studying philosophy, that might have been okay. But as an engineering graduate, probably they were expecting something else. It's clear to see that ADHD is a kind of a lifelong journey. And in that kind of adjustments, what do people understand? Well, even I don't necessarily understand it, and I've got it, or I live with it. In fact, Craig, I think, Glenn, sorry, you mentioned Greta Thunberg, and I saw a video only last week, I think, where she said she likes to be considered an autistic person. Just like, you don't call somebody who is white a person with whiteness. And actually, it's part of who you are. And I appreciated that. But the whole kind of workplace adjustments journey is complicated because your employer rightfully has expectations of performance. Then there's this grey area in the middle of what systems and approaches can people, or is it appropriate for people to rely on? And then what happens when you get competing needs? So as somebody who really likes talking, but with ADHD has a slight problem with butting in, I love writing things in the chat. So if you ever get on a Teams meeting with me, you will definitely see me chucking my thoughts in the chat, because if you get me to wait my turn, I will have almost certainly forgotten, because you'll have said something really clever that has triggered a thought. And similarly, ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. A, I'm not very hyperactive. And B, I haven't got a deficit of attention. I've got absolutely loads of it. It's all going on in there. The problem is controlling it, channeling it. It should be attention channeling disorder, I think. Yeah. And just finally, though, and I think one of the key things to, as someone newly diagnosed, I have to remind myself, things like adjustments is a compromise, because you fit into an organization, the organization has needs. If you're dealing with individuals, they have needs. There isn't, and I have seen a few short form videos of people kind of going, well, I've got this, so everyone in the universe should change because I've got the thing. And it's like, life's not that simple. We should be a bit more collaborative and thinking about compromise and getting the balance right. And I think that is one of the key things, if I can get across today, is that whole kind of adjustments process. It's a journey, and getting the balance right is important.
That's great. Thanks, Craig. And I hope all of us have got that wonderful mental image, which you can now kind of rest easy over, of your abstract, which is as abstract as it gets.
Yeah, exactly.
And in a sense, it tells 1,000 words, doesn't it? That blank page, particularly with the story you've given. I won't bombard you with questions, but I just wanted to kind of put on the record some of the thoughts as I was listening to you. One was that notion of having lots of organizations that you've worked for, in contrast to Jenny. And I'm imagining that kind of rather naive sifting of CVs where someone goes, oh, well, hang on, wonder why he's moved around so much. There must be a problem there, as opposed to, there's a hidden talent here that we need to latch onto. And your point about good old-fashioned training, and just that sense that presumably coming from a neurotypical space is that almost ignorance. And I don't think it's necessarily willful ignorance, but it's certainly ignorance that allows this perpetuation of, well, this is how it's done. You must need this, Craig. You know, that the list says that's that's what's going to suit you best. So those were two thoughts. The other one that just, I think you reminded us of the bumpy journey. And if I may just very briefly share part of the conversation, it's something that Emma Woods, who we're coming to, Emma, mentioned. I'm not in a position yet where I even quite know whether I fit into any of this narrative, but I'm scratching my head, as I've sort of hinted at. And Emma, you had this lovely phrase yesterday or the day before. Well, if you are on this journey, Glenn, just be kind to yourself. And I thought, well, I'm up for this. You know, I don't think I need to be kind to myself. And then I got in the evening and thought, but supposing the only reason I love heavy metal is because I'm looking for sensory stimulation. Supposing it's just a bit of brain wiring and that's all it is. And I said to my wife, you know, actually I'm a bit scared about this. And then I reassured myself that there was too much value in heavy metal and there was lots of other things that made it special to me. But I just got a taste, Craig, of that bumpy journey that you've described. So thanks for sharing that. Okay, let's move on. I'm going to move to, and I've got to say this because Emma said I could, I'm going to move on to Langers. So Emma L, because we've got two Emmas, could I hand over to you next, please?
Thank you, Glenn. So as is my wont, I'm spotting patterns in what other people have been saying, and I want to draw some threads together around that, which is why my favourite thing in the world to do is to do closing keynote speeches at conferences. So that's like, I love to do that very much, which is weird because according to my autism assessment, my anxiety, social anxiety, is a score of 8 out of 12. So I think that I'm quite confusing to look at from the outside, because I certainly present as extremely confident. Certainly in my inner world and my outer world, there's no doubt that I'm hilarious. But actually, it can be quite difficult in terms of self-esteem and self-belief. And something we've not really touched on yet is that for many neurodivergent people, we can have quite a crippling sense of shame. So, you know, Craig was talking about, the desk gets booked for him, but he doesn't unbook it, and then presumably someone tells him off, and then he feels naughty. And I think that's quite a consistent experience for us. For me, once I was diagnosed with ADHD, the biggest impact of trying medication wasn't about being organised, although that was wonderful and also made me very angry because neurotypical people have been playing on cheat mode their whole lives, as far as I can see. But the other part of it was that it helped me with a thing called rejection sensitivity dysphoria, which has been sort of on the edge of paranoia at times in my life. And so it probably doesn't help. I was born with extrophy of the bladder, so I was wearing nappies and things through school, and so obviously I was bullied for that. But I also couldn't work out how to integrate myself into the social setting. So as part of my ADHD assessment, which was last year at the grand age of 47, I was diagnosed with combined ADHD. So that means that I'm hyperactive. So what you can't see is me wiggling around on my chair underneath the desk. Jenny's laughing, she's doing the same. And inattentivity. So that kind of paying attention to lots of things that I perhaps don't want to be paying attention to. And that does combine with the autism. So it was kind of odd when I watched Chris Packham's documentaries and things like that, and he was describing what autism's like. And I was like, I just thought that's how everyone experienced the world. I just assumed everyone sees every leaf on the tree. And I feel kind of a little bit sad that many people miss out on some of that beauty in nature and the patterns that are out there. And what must it be like to go to a friend's bathroom and not see faces in the bathroom tiles, you know? So I just thought those were things that happen for everyone. My career, rather like Craig's, I've bounced around quite a lot. I started as a transport planner, which I loved a great deal because it had the analytical part that my autistic brain likes, but also the mapping and connecting ideas and systems that my ADHD brain likes. And I came across Deming's work around about 1999, W. Edwards Deming, and that's been my special interest ever since. And what fascinates me is around how do we create systems and places and processes that allow people to be at their best. So for me, I talk a lot about lean and process improvement, but it's not about waste, it's not about efficiency, it's about, I think it's criminal that human talent gets wasted doing stupid things. And I do believe that joy in work should be an absolute human right. In fact, I was on a call with a colleague yesterday who said, "Oh, I shouldn't be having this much fun at work because we were really having a great time." And I believe that we should absolutely be having lots of fun at work and doing our best work. It's been interesting. So I rejoined employment 6 months ago with AECOM, where I was welcomed by Michael Whitaker, who you mentioned earlier, who's my neuro brother. So we have different forms of neurodiversity, but actually my autistic ADHD brain finds generally dyslexic brains pretty easy to understand. So I quite often find it most easy to talk to other autistic with ADHD people. After that, autistic people probably. I find pure ADHD people quite tiring generally, and I go quite quiet. And I find dyslexic people, I think that I struggle sometimes with words, finding words, and so that can create a commonality with dyslexic folk, I think. So the stuff I'm working on right now, my line manager in my sort of probation review wrote some things and then told me afterwards that actually he didn't mean that thing, which was an interesting observation of him adjusting to neurodiversity. So that is, he essentially said, I'm really good at big picture stuff and seeing things other people don't see. And I'm really good at really detailed things and noticing details that others might have missed, but that I needed to work on that sort of middle space. And then by the time he had the conversation with me and reflected, he said, well, actually, I'm probably never going to be really good at that, but I'm exceptionally good at the other two things. And so instead of me trying to learn to be good at something I don't find easy, I can be paired with somebody else who finds those things easier. And one of my colleagues and I were reflecting that quite often I feel like I'm cheating and he's working harder because I'll say some stuff and then he puts it into beautiful PowerPoint slides. And he shared with me that he had felt that he was cheating because all he was doing was taking my stuff and putting them into beautiful PowerPoint slides. So I think it's important to notice that we can all feel like we're not enough and we're not giving enough, but it is even bigger with, I think, with neurodivergent people. Ironically then, a thing that's quite tricky for us is social communication. It's social communication disorder. And so when we're trying to articulate the adjustments that would help us, so as Jenny was saying, would really help if those were brought to us rather than us having to self-advocate. I've had some conversations in which I've tried to explain that trying to explain why it's difficult is in itself difficult. And quite often I feel like I spend my whole life in like a second or third language and I'm constantly translating for other people. Anyway, I'm going to stop very soon. There's a full podcast episode on women in transport, which is like my whole tragic backstory. If anyone doesn't have anything else to get them off to sleep tonight, that should do it. But the other thing I just wanted to say was, what does this give me in terms of superpowers and why has it been worth staying here? So around about 72% of autistic people in the UK are unemployed, and autistic women have about a 13 times higher rate of suicide than other people. And certainly I have struggled an awful lot with mental illness and things throughout my life. And I stay because I have children and they need me to be their mum. That's the main thing. But also because I feel like if I can be me, then other people can be them, and then that's better for everybody. So that's very important. And I suppose I've fallen over the years into a space that is ironically I'm really good at because I've studied it hard, because something was difficult. So it's a bit like someone with a stutter becoming a phenomenal speaker or something like that. So I'm really good at observing groups, understanding interactions, creating safe places for people to be. And so my buzz is doing transformational work. So the ADHD can see the whole picture, can see the future, can understand where people are trying to get to, can create stories that take people along. And contrary to popular belief, my autistic traits are super empathy. I can feel how people are feeling in the room and how nervous they are or stressed they are or whatever. And I can think from that very, like, from the bottom detail around what can we put in place to make that work better for these people. So in my change projects, I don't have resistance to change because I don't think it's a necessary step to go through. I think you can just do empathy instead and storytelling instead. And so that's where I've fallen into, is doing really pretty elegant, very human, transformational change with organizations. I think that's more than enough about me.
Thank you, Emma. I found that very touching, I have to say, and an incredible richness, both of making sense of yourself, but also making sense of those around you. Strange little line came into my head, which will have particular meaning to my wonderful son, Robin, who is now 30 and may or may not be on the call. His mother and I used to say, Robin has got frogs in his pockets and stars in his eyes. And I always remember the phrase, looking out the window at school, fidgeting, and not really connecting the dots in the way that you've just done so powerfully. And I know you've been through a long life journey up to this point to be able to do that. But what's I find amazing, and I think you've all mentioned it in different ways in our build-up conversations, is that hearing from others about themselves and it triggering connections in our own minds about ourselves and our lives and our families and friends and relationships that may or may not have thrived, may have struggled to survive. I just wondered a question back to you. My impression is you've got this, one of your superpowers is this incredible ability to make sense of yourself and to be able to read other people. I'm not sure I'm necessarily that good at it, and I'm very aware others aren't particularly good at it at all. In fact, that sense of insensitivity is sometimes overwhelming. Is that something you pick up in other humans, that some people are good at holding the mirror up and really understanding who they are, their strengths and vulnerabilities, and other people stumble through trampling on others around them because they've got kind of blinkers on, and whether it's their fault or not, they just don't have that capacity to make sense?
So one of the reasons I find eye contact quite demanding is because you can see in a person's eyes quite a lot of what they've been through and what they're going through now. So even sometimes I'll challenge myself, but I realized I shouldn't do this on escalators because it made me dizzy. So I was coming up from London Underground into Euston Station. I thought I'll just look at some people's eyes as they go past, and I can fall into their eyes by mistake. And you can see certain people who try, like, their eyes are gentle and soft, and they try and hide it and protect themselves. And then you see other people's eyes where it's kind of like glazed across, and I think that they've probably been hurt a lot. And I have had bullies and things like that, and I don't hold anything against any of those people because I think that they must have just been going through their own stuff. And on that podcast thing, which I mentioned, the Women in Transport one, there's the example of my mum and what she taught me. So I lost a sibling when I was a child, and my mum's response to that and understanding what was going on for other people and why they reacted in the way that they reacted, that taught me a lot. I watched her, and I learned a lot from her and how she sees the world and feels the world. And then the other thing is I spent a lot of time in hospital, and if you spend time in hospital, there's always somebody a lot worse off than you are and somebody who's not as badly off as you are. So I learned not to compare, and that's really important, but just to be kind and just be present and hold space for people. That's very important.
Yeah, thank you, Emma. And I can very much, I think it's palpable, the sense of almost that ability is subjecting you to a huge amount of pressure, in the sense that the inputs that you're receiving from the world around you more than can be borne sometimes. So yeah, thank you for sharing that. Just briefly before I come to our other Emma, there's a couple of points I'm seeing points being made in our audience about perhaps the distinction between a spectrum and a constellation. And I know at our end, because we've got our own chat bar going on as the panel, Craig, do you want to briefly offer up your tapas versus chilies equivalent to that?
Yeah, so I too, having recently been joining the club, have considered, say, autism as a spectrum, and wrongly thinking it went from really bad autism to not so bad autism. So this continuous line image was something that I probably held to. And since diagnosis, obviously, been thinking about it. And actually, if you think more like this is tapas, and you've got a whole table full of different things, and maybe one person's got serious challenges with, say, social and communication skills, someone else might have, I mean, in the ADHD space, how hyperactive are you? And also, I think, yeah, so it's more about the fact that all people with neurodiversity are different. We're people, so we've got different balances. So yeah, so it's about the fact that even though you might know one person with, say, or ASD, you should be considering the fact that, well, maybe they're really good at conversations and leading meetings, as we've heard earlier, and other people that might be too much and they can't do it, and they're really good at something else. And so it's about the fact that it's a series of different traits that are at different levels.
Thanks, Craig. And actually,
as referred to as a spiky profile as well, you might see that.
Yeah. And as you're talking, just to finish, and I will come to Emma. Emma's waited patiently. I love the notion of tapas, because, of course, it's typically a dish that we share, and that should be the spirit of sharing our diversity and being more inclusive. So, Emma, you must be by now brimming with things that you're wanting to get in, and I suspect Jenny's going to want a second go as well shortly. But over to you, Emma.
Hello, hi. Well, I'm kind of thinking, what was I actually meant to be doing? Because I've written down loads of notes. You won't be able to see this because it's all blurred out, but I have big A3 pieces of paper that I scribble stuff down on. And everyone always used to like this when I worked in my last sort of like formal job. They're like, wow, you've got these big mind maps. And to me, again, this was just a normal thing that I did. So yeah, I've taken all the notes, everything that Jenny, Craig, and Emma have said. I'm like, oh, well, I'll mention this, I'll mention this. One of the things is fidget toys. So if you've seen me doing this, it's because I've got a very lovely fidget toy, which since my diagnosis, I've been leaning into these sorts of things because I always felt like I needed something to fiddle with. And fidget toys are something that exist and you can have. And just having this is like a little soother. Oh, so nice. So yeah, if you've been watching me playing with this thing, it's lovely. Anyway, so I'm meant to be talking about who I am. It made me laugh, Glenn, when you said that we were accomplished professionals. Made me smile anyway, because yeah, you can look at sort of my background on LinkedIn and things, but basically I started out my career as a professional economist. So I worked in the government economic service, worked in the public sector, was very much in that mainstream world. And then becoming a parent, COVID happened, and then got my ADHD diagnosis. I kind of call it my unraveling, if you like, and I think I'm still unraveling now. So I was diagnosed with combined ADHD at the age of 34. Similar to other people, it had been a slow process. So actually, through listening through to these introductions and conversations, it's reminded me that I actually had an earlier kind of brush with neurodiversity. I'd completely forgotten about it. But I got a book from the library and started to read it and thought, oh, this sort of sounds a bit like me. And then it went away for a few years, came back when I started working quite closely with somebody else who was neurodiverse, and they sort of kept sharing these memes on Instagram. And sorry, I'm just seeing the chat about failed dyslexia tests. Yeah, it seems like it's this kind of brush, and I wonder if part of it for me is sort of changing and morphing of symptoms over time. So from my own point of view, I noticed that my ADHD traits or symptoms seem heightened at certain times. And again, thinking back to my own kind of experiences, I used to call these like periods of feeling manic because I didn't really have the words to describe it. But I'd actually say that I'm feeling quite manic at the moment, and it's when I take too much on. And, you know, I was actually talking to my husband last night and saying, like, I feel really frustrated at myself because I've taken on so much the past few weeks. And I just feel kind of overwhelmed because I'd not prepared for this. You know, rather than preparing for this, I was making a dress last night until 1 o'clock in the morning, which is just classic ADHD stuff. I can see the panel sort of giggling, going, oh, yeah, yeah, we hear you on that. But, you know, my husband kind of said to me, but this is part of you, right? This is part of who you are and how your brain works. And you will always take more on than you can handle. So that's kind of a very jumbled sort of introduction to who I am. What I do now, so like I said, I was working in public sector, I was working in transport, and then about 18 months ago, I left a sort of full-time salary job and went into self-employment, which has simultaneously been very, very liberating, but also terrifying, because some of the things that the panel have already talked about in terms of, you know, pressures to fit in, productivity, are you doing enough, the to-do lists, all of that pressure when you're self-employed feels very heavy on your shoulders because you kind of lose that support, you lose the colleagues, you lose HR. So it has been quite challenging, but like I said, I've also enjoyed that liberation, because one thing that I felt when I was in sort of organizations was I felt quite constricted and quite constrained. And I wonder if that again is part of the neurodivergent traits that I have. I have a very strong sense of justice. And if we were doing things at work that didn't fit quite, you know, didn't sit well with me, I would find it really hard to bite my tongue and be like, do I have to do this? Do I have to toe the party line? So yeah, there was definitely those things kind of happening when I was in that sort of employed role. And, you know, Craig's example of stress of a desk. Oof, yeah. Yeah, I used to feel that. I used to try commute in quite far and not knowing if I was going to get a desk and requesting, can I have a desk just for me? But then that was not always possible because of the desk ratios. I don't know if other people have, yeah, I've experienced these. So there's only 8 desks for every 10 employees. And it's just got me kind of thinking really about, you know, what is actually important to organizations? Is it the people and helping, you know, if you have got conditions that heighten this anxiety of not having a desk, is it more important to have desks for them, or is it more important to save money and desk space? So a lot of the work that I do now is around, I guess, kind of challenging our society, challenging our economy, challenging, you know, what is normal, what is accepted, and asking those difficult questions. So I can't remember who it was. It might have been Emma, that sort of said about challenging, asking the hard questions. I always had a reputation for doing that, particularly in the transport sector. But that's where my kind of economics has taken me now, is casting a critical lens over our economic system, over our systems, over our schooling, just basically how we live our lives and the structures that we have, and whether these are confining, which I think a lot of them probably are, particularly if you are in this neurodiverse sort of world. And are there ways to make that feel a bit more liberatory? Is that a word?
It can be
Sorry.
a word
Yeah.
right now, Emma.
Sorry, Glenn, I've got no idea if that's really an introduction or how we are on time, but I will pause there.
No, well, again, it's been wonderful, Emma. And it, I think for me, and I hope it for the audience, is just that reminder that talking really helps. it unlocks our minds. And I'm scribbling furiously, and I hope it's true for the audience, because we learn more about each other. I'm going to mention it again because I shared it with you as a group earlier in the week. But when I posted on LinkedIn for the last promotional time for this event, I have a faithful troll who appears sometimes on my LinkedIn posts, and true to form, he just put up a one-liner which said, "It's called life, get over it." And who knows whether it's a bot or whether it's somebody who totally lacks empathy or is just out to get a rise for other reasons. But that's to some extent the dark underbelly that we live with, and particularly those who are struggling and not feeling typical, and therefore subject to extra challenges to process and bring forward their strengths. I think that cuts deep. I suppose the only grain of truth in what he said is that it's life in the sense that we are a neurodiverse species, and everyone is going through life with their own tapas in front of them, and making sense of it. I suppose the one thing I want to come back for you on, Emma, was you said you were laughing about me saying, you're all accomplished. From what I know of all of you, you absolutely are. And I'm in awe of what you're sharing with us today, and not just in terms of your brain wiring, but how your skill sets and how you articulate that. But this notion of all successful, I know you were mentioning about you're actually the super candidate when it comes to interviews, because you're able to read not only what the interview is designed to find, but whether or not you want to just go with the flow of that rather fake approach, or give them your authentic self. So it's kind of, do I want the job, in which case I can play your game, or do I want to get a job that you know the real me for, in which case you might not offer me the job? Would you like to say a bit more about that?
Yeah, I'll just qualify what I said with, it was more about me being an accomplished professional, not a judgment on anybody else. I'm sure everybody else seems very accomplished. It just, the people on the panel will have already seen my sort of selection of memes, but it reminded me of a meme where people sort of say, "Oh yes, we've seen your profile, you look very professional," and you're replying to it in your pajamas, which is what I'm wearing most of the time now. So when Jenny was saying about this, professionalism being linked to outward appearance, it sort of just makes me cringe a bit, because it's like, I could be brilliant for the job, but I'm just not fitting that mold that society is kind of demanding. And this links to sort of the interviews, and this, I now kind of see it as a game, which is maybe not the right way to think about it, but I'm still involved in interviews sometimes as a sort of external panel member. And it just feels like the hoops that we ask people to go through, some of them automatically exclude people with disabilities. So some of the exercises we ask people to do, some exercises purposely have very short timescales, and it's with the understanding of, oh, well, we ask this many questions, knowing you'll never be able to do it. We just want to put you under pressure. And I think it's like, well, is this real? Is this necessary for the job? Why do we want to stress people out? Surely we want the best out of them. And usually when I start these interviews that are often online, I say, my job actually is to get the best out of you. I don't want you to fall apart and feel stressed. I don't want this to be a horrible experience, because ultimately, for me, the interview is kind of a gateway, isn't it? And I now think that if I went to an interview and they were asking me to do things that I thought were ridiculous, I'd probably say, I'm not doing it, because I don't want to work in an organization where this is important. Like, what is actually important here? And sometimes they ask these strengths-based questions where there's a very regimented pro forma of how you should answer them. And if you're honest, you get a big, right, you failed that question. And it's like, but where's the nuance? Where's the understanding? We can't have this binary thinking in this, diverse world that we have, and these spectrums that we've been talking about.
Yeah. Thanks, Emma. Okay, we still don't have Bonnie, so we'll see what happens. But Bonnie, if you're out there listening for any reason, we're feeling you here. You're part of the gang. And also, if when I'm doing the write up for this, if we'll try to capture some of Bonnie's thoughts if she can't make it. I'm compelled to do a shout out back to my son Robin, who I can see from feed across is in the audience, and your point, Robin, about super empathy strength that can be exhausting, but also a huge superpower. All I can say is that there was immediate love coming back from the panel in our chat bar here. So thanks for that comment. Just on your last point, Emma, our other Emma highlighted that I don't think we've yet got a neurodivergent AI. ChatGPT neurodivergent doesn't seem to exist. So watch out, recruiters, because you may be losing the best people just because you're allowing the AI to do the sift. Is the message there. I suppose I shouldn't be surprised that we have 35 minutes left and I've got 150 questions. And I know our panel members have also got all sorts of things they would like to share with you. So I'm going to come to Jenny in a moment, and we're just going to do a bit more turn taking to work through a little bit like Emma's mind maps. I suspect that, well, both Emmas have probably got a revised mind map, and Craig perhaps as well. So I'll come to you in a moment, Jenny. The only thing I would ask is if it would be interesting if you've got any examples specifically related to transport. I mean, I don't suppose it's mattering greatly to our audience. Well, yes, but what about transport? What about driverless cars? I need to know something about how fantastic neurodivergent people can be in making them a success. I don't think that matters, but it might be that you've got one or two tasters of why we really need, as Michael had said, when we had the idea for this fireside chat, wouldn't it be great to get a bunch of these superhuman brains into the room to tackle some of the issues in our sector? So enough from me. Jenny, what would you like to come back to us with?
So many things, and I'm going to remember, I'm going to forget all of them as soon as I start talking. I think a couple of things I wanted to get out is one of the best memes or whatever that I heard, catchphrases, was when you are going through that journey of finding out that you're neurodivergent, up until that point, you feel like you're a broken horse. And it isn't until you find another zebra that you realise actually you're a zebra, not a broken horse. And it's so lovely when Emma was saying about her jiggling behind the desk, because I'm desperately trying to stay still at the top half. So I'm not doing this because my legs below are like this, because I have forgotten my fidget spinner and it's at my desk. So I can't fidget spin it. So my legs are going tender. And I'm thinking, oh my God, everyone's going to watch me. So finding out other zebras and being honest about your zebra stripes is amazing. And it's so supportive of everybody else. I think also when you're looking at the empathy thing, there's another thing that I talk about, which is the spoon theory. I'm not going to go through it because it's a lot of time to go through it, but look it up, spoon theory, right? So, and why this was relevant to the transport industry is that when you're looking at me getting up in the morning and getting dressed and having to think, how do I dress today to make sure I'm fitting this, whatever I need to fix, and I need to have my breakfast, but I've forgotten to buy the milk and all of these things, right? And everyone's another spoon gone, right? And then I have to interact with the transport system in order to get me to work. Now that's the difference between losing one spoon before I get to work or 10 spoons, depending on how that transport system is designed. And that can be a massive barrier to how you live your day, how you do at school. It is one of the biggest barriers to people even being able to work. Why so many people prefer working from home than being in the office can be the transport system. And that's why I see so many neurodivergent. I think it was mentioned in our chat offline around the canary effect, about understanding that quite often we are the canaries in the space who will provide you that input about what the sensory difficulties are, filling in the form, buying the ticket. I love the fact that buses tell me now where I am and what the next stop is, because the chances are I've drifted off and I can't remember if I've missed it. So having that information there is a life's game changer for me on buses, on trains, you know. And that's not just great for us as neurodivergent, it's also great for those who are visually impaired or have hearing impairments. That dual input is a massive thing. And so that is linking it back to the transport system, Glenn. So there you go.
Fantastic.
In terms of kind of looking at it and having an example from my own experience, one of the things that I have done since working here at Heathrow is looking at the aircraft de-icing process here for Heathrow. It's a big bottleneck for us in terms of being able to operate during the winter, was being able to manage the flow of de-icing of aircraft through that process. What being neurodivergent gave me was multiple things. Was one, as others have suggested, that big picture thinking. I could understand the information coming in from Eurocontrol around the new IT system. I factored that out. I understood the building blocks. I looked at the ground handling and all the other bits here. I pulled it all together, and I could provide that in a very short narrative so that others could then come on board. I understood the empathy of the ground handlers and others about changing the system, what the impact was going to be to them, and how could we bring them on board. I understood the nuance of NATS versus operations versus British Airways, and how we needed to make sure all those players felt heard and seen and stroked the feathers so that they would all come to the party. I then could put it into systems whereby I could pull in the IT people. So it was that ability to see the big picture, understand the detail, work with empathy with the individuals, create the narrative, all of these things, all working at the same time, all those little breadcrumbs of little conversations you will have had, little instances you've had within the system that then create this massive change and pivot. And that's what I think those who think differently and experience the world differently have to be able to bring to the party. And I think, looking back at the AI and the other pieces that we've been talking about, and the barriers to individuals getting through the education system, maybe not passing their maths and English, but do they need that particular maths and English to be able to be great in the industry? Maybe not. Maybe they need a different level that's currently not assessed. Small point. But it is those other skills, that things that are picked out by the Ernest Young report in skills for the future, dyslexic thinking, that will be the skills we need in the future. And how do we make sure that those are the ones that are recognised by whichever system you use? How do we ensure that actually we're not building a system that is one size fits all, because we know that's not true, and cognitive styles are different. And through evolution, we understand that actually the point that we have got to humanity now is because of that different thinking. It's because that heightened sensory meant that actually those tribes didn't eat those berries because the heightened senses picked out the smell didn't right. And all of these things are here for an evolutionary reason, and the reason they're still here is because we still need them in order to advance and innovate into the future. I think that's probably enough from me, but there's probably 90 other things that I wanted to say that I now remember.
As we reminded ourselves, an hour and a half just isn't enough, and yet it feels like 5 minutes. Just very briefly, thank you for that, Jenny. When you were talking about how many spoons, my mind immediately went to the picture I have, and I've used it many times, of Homer Simpson's brain, the cross section where it's got, and you can imagine the different parts of the brain, and one little small part is getting to work because the other's got duff beer, sex, donuts, and sleep and TV. But what I hadn't appreciated was it's not just that, that Homer is more interested in other things. It's actually that Homer can't necessarily cope with too many things, which is why you get the psychological notion of satisficing behavior, because we can't afford to give up too many spoons on our way to work. Talking of brains, apologies to the person in the audience who thinks I've put an image of some intestines up next to my head. It's actually me asking AI to create an image of neurodiversity in terms of brain types, not intestines. So I apologize for that. I would just like to ask our audience, before I move perhaps to MRL for some further thoughts. Obviously, if you're comfortable to do so, and I can see there's quite a lot of sharing going on, don't do so if you're uncomfortable. But I think it would be really helpful for the recording of this if you were willing to share one or two of your own thoughts at this point. It might be a point of vulnerability about yourself, a point of realization that you've come to either in this conversation today or recently that you feel others might benefit from. The other question I was left in my mind with was, I wonder in our audience, and perhaps the audience can see for themselves, whether we've got any senior managers, team leaders who are looking to make recruitments, who are deciding who gets sent on what sort of training or suggest what sort of training is needed, because that's really the influence that we're needing. We want to have people right up through the chain who are truly engaging with this issue and the richness that we're experiencing today. Emma, back to you.
The button I thought would work didn't work, so on button B. So I would say that things are changing, and specifically in the transport sector, I'm quite excited about some of the stuff my own employer has been involved in. So ACON with Arab have done some really good work on the experience of neurodivergent people in roadworks and what it's like for us to follow diversions and that kind of thing. At Highways UK this year, we partnered up with Anster, who do visual reality headsets, and they shared the experience of autistic people if a journey plan changes. And that was weird because I put the headset on and I'm like, when do you start the simulation? Because it seemed totally normal to me. For me, I'm glad that things like my great big headphones are now considered pretty much socially normal. So I wear those all the time if I'm traveling in public transport pretty much. But even then, if we get burnt out, last week I went to a company event. It was a sensory nightmare. Which was acknowledged by the people that organised it, and they're going to take that into account next time, which was really nice. And by the time I sort of got back to the hotel, having gone through the tube and the smells and all of it, just the sound of my coat sleeves rubbing against my coat as I walked was driving me mad. I was just getting really angry with my coat for being so loud. So it sort of can build up until even noises inside my own head and can be annoying. I love the tube map. That's the ultimate autistic ADHD icon. It's beautiful. It's color coded. It's everything else. But for years, I didn't realize that it's not exactly to scale because autism. And I only found out this year that Banks connected to Monument, which is like an exciting revelation in my trips to London. Probably the biggest thing for me on public transport is misophonia. So that's the noises are so difficult. Even with my headphones on, if somebody's using the haptics on their phone, that will cut through, and it makes me want to hurt people, which is not a feeling I enjoy sitting with. And 2 days ago, a lady got on the train opposite me and sat there with a big shopping bag with a packet of crisps inside the shopping bag. So not only could I hear the crisps coming out of the packet, but the packet rustling inside the bag, and they were smelly. They were probably like beef flavored ones, and she was crunching them. And yes, and I had to listen to the trawl and think about other things because it just made me so cross. And I'd wanted to get some work done, and I just couldn't get the work done because it was taking me everything that I could, not just say, why are you such an unreasonable human being? And yet, obviously, I recognise that eating a packet of crisps on a train probably isn't considered a crime against humanity. So yeah, it's just that sort of understanding. And the thing for me is to recognise that if I'm heading towards burnout, if I'm really, really worn out, then I shouldn't travel by public transport. Yeah. But the hard thing is alexithymia, which is about not knowing and lack of proprioception or however it's pronounced. So I won't know that I'm heading towards that until I'm really, really close to it, in the same way that I don't realize that I'm hungry or thirsty until I'm suddenly like, oh my goodness. So not being aware of what's going on inside your own body, but intensely aware of the noises around you. Let's just say I can understand why throughout my life people have described me as controlling, because it's better than hurting people.
Well, Emma, let's just put on record that it is a crime against humanity in a cinema to open a packet of crisps or sweets. I think there's few people that would be sat there thinking, oh, I'm not worried by that at all. Or at least maybe that's my presumption that everyone else is like me. Just actually, I want to use a segue to Craig, if I may, because you mentioned your event this week with sensory overload. And I don't know if they're on the call, but a shout out to Tom Van Vuren, Stephen Cragg and Robin Cambry, who together with Craig and I were having a bit of a chewing the fat over life a few months ago, weren't we, Craig? And we got onto the topic of conferences. And let's be honest, how many conferences have we all been to with those set piece, lots of people bustling around in the coffee break, but then the coffee break's cut short because you've got 3 presentations, each with 20 minutes and a couple of questions, but we're running out of time and it just rumbles on. And you were making the point, Craig, that do we realize that some of the best minds in our industry wouldn't ever make it to be at that event? Would you like to elaborate if you can recall?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So this is also something I've raised with, so one of my favorite conferences, other conferences are available, the European Transport Conference, which is a 3-day event, which clearly even for neurotypical people, by the end they've had enough. And for that event, I was suggesting maybe you have a quiet carriage, a quiet room, and actually most of my favourite really detailed centric transport modelers, they're not keen on that whole hubbub. Well, ADHD me, I'm in my element, I'm loving it. Ask a few cheeky questions. See the big picture, top down thinking, lots of that, chuck it about a bit, that's all good. And actually, most of my kind of analytically astute colleagues who I'd really want to go to these kind of events kind of go, oh no, I'm not, no, that overload is just beyond real. And actually, I do think there is a steady growing pace of acceptance. I mean, just with ADHD, you couldn't get an adult diagnosis in this country until 2008. So you were either a naughty boy, because there's a big gender difference in diagnosis, or you weren't diagnosed. So Craig has lots of must do better. If only Craig would apply himself, he'd do really well. Thanks, school. That was helpful. And as I said in the chat somewhere else, I'm probably one of the few people who's failed a dyslexia test 3 times. So it's clear that at different stages in my life, people have gone, there's something not quite wired up right here. It's like, oh, what? And the thing that led me to this particular diagnosis was writing this report took blinking ages. What's going on? Let's go and have a third poke at the dyslexia tree. But also in the kind of positive space, though, and just to share some kind of really little coping strategies. You see this? It's a train ticket. Most people think, well, it's just a train ticket. It's not a problem. But for me, every time I get on the train, and until recently, I hated train ticket inspectors. I'd be the guy with being male, talking about clothes, I've got a jacket on, I've got a coat on, I've got a rucksack, I've probably got a little bag inside my rucksack. Someone says, where's your ticket? I'm like, oh, Christ, where's my ticket? Start with the trousers. Like, you could probably spot the ADHD person on the train because they'll start with their trousers, they'll go to the shirt pocket, and about 15 minutes later, if you're lucky, you've found your tickets. And all that time, the ticket inspector is slowly but surely going, oh, this bloke's a professional fare dodger. Professional fare dodger here. Come on, folks. And he gets his mate across and you're like, oh, come on. I'm not a professional fare dodger. I've just lost my tickets. And one of the things I absolutely love, which goes with the little wallet, is this little lanyard. It's been a game changer. So actually, I have now seen ticket inspectors' faces. And as mentioned earlier, we're very good at reading people. So I can tell that they've seen the lanyard because I pulled this out of my pocket and gone, oh, crap, it's not in there. Where is it? And they've gone, okay, I'll just give you a break. This is fine. I'm not going to get over you and make it super pressurize it. So yeah, I think the general acceptance is definitely building. And yeah, I can't remember what your first question was now.
No, I think you've dealt with that. You've dealt with that brilliantly, Craig. And I'm going to bet there's at least one person in the audience who's thinking, must get myself one of those. Must get my ticket in somewhere recognizable. Emma, just a question to pass to you if you want to take it, but obviously you have some thoughts, Emma Woods. I noticed one of our audience members was commenting about this sense of, well, I kind of know I've got ADHD, but I'm not ready to go and ask someone to confirm and get this. I don't know whether people see diagnosis with a great big D in front of it in this very scary way or a kind of self-affirmation way. But all of you have described how, I think, later diagnoses. But could you just say a little bit about any words of advice, which is probably quite a difficult ask of you, for those who are the side of diagnosis beforehand and weighing up what happens if I step forwards? And others might want to add. I know you'll probably say it varies, but what do you think, Emma?
Yeah, I think I would say I think we've mentioned it a few times. This sort of spikiness, and I know Glenn, you've said as well. There's this possibly, maybe, and then you think maybe I am comfortable with this. And then something happens and it's like, oh no, that's poked a bit too hard. I don't like that. So I don't think the process is linear, basically. So I don't think there's this point where you suddenly go, yeah, I'm going to go to the doctors and they're going to give me this diagnosis, because the other challenge is the waiting lists. and you don't know what reception you might get from your GP. And again, that not knowing, are you going to get a GP that's really helpful? Are you going to get a GP that's like, oh, well, you'll be on the wait list for 6 years, so I don't know what you want. And, I was kind of lucky that I went to my GP. I had already spoken to somebody who'd gone through the Right to Choose and said, here's the letter from the Right to Choose Psychiatry UK page. Print this off, take this questionnaire. And because I'm kind of odd, I love a form. As soon as I had the forms, I wanted to fill them in because I'm the good school girl. I loved doing all the forms. So I printed them off. I did the thing. I took them. And the GP was like, I've never heard of Right to Choose and Psychiatry UK, but yeah, okay, I'll do it. And didn't really seem to know what the process was. But there was still, I think, even with me being, that proactive and knowing the steps because somebody else had already done it and told me how it worked, I think I still had about a 12 to 18-month wait. And I know, well, when I last heard Psychiatry UK weren't taking on any NHS referrals. So, that was one route to potentially quicker diagnosis if you decided to go that far. I think one thing I would say is try and find community. So if you're in this, am I not? I know locally, near to where I live in Chesterfield, there's an ADHD drop-in group. I think they meet once every couple of weeks in town. It's all very informal. Go and talk to them. That is one step towards getting into the community, feeling a bit more, you're in a bit of a safer space. You're able to share these things. It's other people that kind of get it. So reach out to them, hear their experiences, and just see if you're ready. Because for lots of people, you don't necessarily need that formal diagnosis. If you want help through access to work, you don't need a formal diagnosis.
Yeah.
So there is some support out there, but like say, NHS waiting lists and access to medication, that's a whole other sort of discussion, but it can be hard. Even after my diagnosis, I was then put on a waiting list for medication, and then the titration and blah blah blah. It just meant that I haven't had access to any of that. So
no, that's really helpful, Emma. And Lang has sort of said, Emma, you've said, perhaps you don't necessarily need it. I think you've really unpicked that well, Emma, because in some cases, well, go and have a chat with a group of people who have a diagnosis and know this and are well versed in it, and they can give you a pretty good idea pretty quickly. And that's a hat off across to Craig, who sent me a very kind email a few days ago doing something very similar. But I also pick up the very serious aspect of the medication that might be needed, and then the frustration of navigating a difficult system. Emma, did you want to come in on that?
Yeah, I was on antidepressants for many years, and then I went on to HRT for a while. And pretty much the second I started my ADHD medication, I didn't need anything else. And I think quite a lot of people with mental health diagnoses, in particular borderline personality disorders, anxiety disorders, those sorts of things, but quite often it's an undiagnosed neurodiversity.
Yeah. Okay, thanks, Emma. I'm also noticing coming in from your chat bar in YouTube, and bearing in mind we're in a different chat bar, one of the questions is, are there any networks for neurodivergent people in the transport space? I suppose an ongoing community, a bit like we're feeling together here in this conversation. Panel members, if there's something that immediately comes to mind, feel free to shout out right now. Otherwise, perhaps we'll try and pick it up as part of the write-up. And if there isn't, maybe today is the start of a thought that we might look to make that happen. Jenny, yes.
There was a group, and I had been prompted to kind of liven it, which was a combination of neurodivergent employee resource groups in a number of companies all coming together to look at what we could do better as an industry. But that's not to say that group couldn't widen to actually be more around individuals within the transport system, rather than just being about how each company learning from each other and how we could do better about designing the transport system as a whole.
Yeah, thanks, Jenny. And actually, I'm just seeing again in our chat some various comments about finding your tribe and the resonance with that. Jenny, you were describing yesterday. I asked you, do you think that figure of about 1 in 5 to 1 in 7 people being neurodivergent feels about right? And you made this very powerful point, which again I sort of thought about the mosh pit at the festival I go to, and you'd said, well, neurodivergent people tend to attract other neurodivergent people. So I wonder for some of you out there whether you've already found your tribe of fellow neurodivergents, whether or not you have a diagnosis and you just didn't realize it, but can perhaps now take comfort in that perhaps being the case. I don't know if others of you wanted to add that, or Jenny, whether you wanted to come back on that.
So I think Emma's already alluded to it, that it takes less energy to, when you're talking to somebody who can mirror your brain activity, your way of processing, your communication style. And so you probably do know those people that you will gravitate towards or come away feeling energized after speaking to them, compared to those that you've had to almost, for me, it's like slowing down my thought, try and put like brakes on as I try and slow down my process or overthink the words I'm using to ensure I'm not unintentionally saying something that is going to cause a negative reaction. Whereas with those that like on this call, where we can literally bounce across 9 different subjects and all follow it without having to tell the other person how I got to here, we're just continuing that conversation, then we could come round all the way back to the starting conversation, and that doesn't seem to be unnormal for us.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Jenny. I've got my mind's bouncing around now, seeing different things being said. I'm drawn immediately by fight scenes in The Matrix from Craig. Do you want to briefly comment on that, Craig?
Yeah, well, it's linked to Jenny's comment about how have you got from here to there, the links that you make between things. And some people, I kind of put people into 3 camps. There are those people who I just talk to and they understand what I mean and they're brilliant. Slightly better than that for me is the people who not only do I talk to, they understand it straight away, but they can then put the thing into words so I can then tell a neurotypical person the thing. They are my absolute go-to heroes and I love them. And then there's the neurotypical ones where I have to go, okay, I'm going to start by, I need to explain that this is always linked with this. I don't care if it's written down anywhere, but it just is. And then as Jenny described, the way you thought about all the different interactions in the airport at the same time in your head, I know exactly what you mean. You don't need to write a 27-page report. Without ever meeting you before, I have every faith that you are awesome at it. And beyond that, more arrogantly, I also know I'm right. So it's just that thing. See, you can't see, but the rest of the panel are all laughing because we get what we mean here. And that's really hard to get across because the structures of the world are neurotypical. So we have to, I use Play-Doh now as a metaphor.
Craig, it needs to be in one of those PowerPoint slides that I can never create. It has to be a very beautiful PowerPoint slide in order for it to.
I'm not bad at PowerPoints if you need any help. But yeah.
Okay,
so the thought process looks a bit like the thing behind your head, Glenn, in the fact that you put your Play-Doh in your mash and you squirt it through, and you had a beautiful thing before, but now it's all a bit straggly, and getting it across is often hard.
Well, look, we're in our last 6 minutes, so I promised I would give you each another go at the mic and kind of what, if it's possible, and we realised that in our matrix-like exploration of this, it might be hard, but I'll give you each in a moment, a kind of minute or so, just to give your takeaway from the conversation. Before I do that, I just wanted to ask the audience again, for the record, as it were, in terms of your chat bar. I'm wondering at this point, are there any people who are still thinking, no, I'm definitely neurotypical? No question. I don't know what they're all talking about. I've wasted an hour and a half of my time. I wonder if anyone out there has not felt a connection with this conversation. And that's not wrong necessarily, that, that's you being you, but it will be lovely to have a few more reflections anyway in the chat bar before we wrap up. But let's work our way around our amazing panel. Emma, you're waving, so why don't we come to you first?
Yeah, I just wanted to say a huge thanks to people for whom this doesn't resonate, for having sat through what to you must seem completely wild and weird, and unstructured and difficult. And please understand that experience that you have is what we have most of the rest of the time. So if you're feeling a little bit tired, you can understand why we do. And there is a great ADHD person out there who talks about hearts and minds. She talks to ADHD people about how our minds work, but she also talks to hearts people, which are people that care about and love and look after and support and want the very best for neurodivergent people. And I'd like to thank you, whether you're a heart or a mind, for joining us on this session.
That's beautiful. Thanks, Emma. Where should we head next? Craig, what would you like to pick out? One or two things that have, takeaways?
For me, I'm just really pleased that we're having the conversation. This is great, raising awareness. And actually, you've allowed us to trailblaze the talents that lie within a neuro diverse mind. And I think recently I've read somewhere that people are suggesting that evolution needs us. So that may be one thing to ponder coming away from this, but also just in general that finding your tribe is important and that awareness is building. And people being diagnosed now aren't just watching TikTok and being trendy. They've probably had it a long time. And yeah.
That's great. Thank you, Craig. Emma, let's come to you.
Yeah, just picking up on that sort of evolution needs us. I know I said about challenging, what is normal anyway. So I always wonder, like, who are the neurotypical people? Because I can't imagine how their brains work. Probably similar, like Emma said, to how people watching this may be like, whoa, how are their brains working? I can't kind of get my head around what a neurotypical brain would look like. So if there is anybody watching this that thinks, no, I'm definitely in that neurotypical camp, I'd really like to talk to you and understand what the differences are. But just on that evolution point, there was some sort of conversation on LinkedIn a couple of weeks ago about neurodiversity, and someone who has a sort of indigenous ancestral wisdom background said that in some indigenous cultures, there is no word for disability. There is no kind of understanding of this neurodiversity. There's just an understanding that you think differently, and whatever you offer the tribe is a beautiful kind of gift. And that was quite profound for me, just kind of how we think about ability, disability. And I know I've sort of mentioned this book before, but you won't be able to read it because it'll be all blurred out, but it's Empire of Normality. And it talks about, who gets to define what is normal, what is, different or not normal. And yeah, I'd just like to kind of leave people with that question, that invitation of what is normal and who gets to decide what normal is. And
Right.
Thank you to the panel, and thank you to Glenn, and deep gratitude to all of you for sharing.
Thank you, Emma. That's beautiful. Jenny.
Just echo the big thanks to the whole, I want to go down the pub immediately and continuing the conversation with you all. I know we would be there pretty much the rest of the night. So I guess my point is that, and I think goes back to where you started, Glenn, which is we all experience, process, think, move, act differently. And then we all have a responsibility to anticipate that. And if we start to anticipate that, then we understand the interconnectedness and the intersectionality of all of our diversity is a fact. And I think the more we do that, the less the stigma will be there. Less stigma internally about, do I have a label or not? Less stigma, it's about asking for what you need and saying, this isn't designed for me. It's nothing wrong with me. It's the design that's at fault. So I think that would be my takeaway moment.
Thank you, Jenny. And just from my point of view, first of all, I'm reminded it's an awful thing I need to get out of my head, but it's the title of a book that was being trailed on Fox News that I saw a clip of. Go woke, go broke. The pushback against equality, diversity and inclusion in corporate US at the moment, I find quite shocking. And I hope everyone today has appreciated that not only does this matter because we're all humans, and the importance of humility, empathy, and open minds, which I think you've all touched upon, is so critical, but also to come back to the point about evolution needs us. It needs us like never before. And I'll just leave the question hanging, which I think it might have been Emma, you raised, Emma Woods, in our prior conversation. Do those with neurodivergence tend to more readily see the shortcomings of the societal system? Because right now we're all grasping for things that will help make stuff right again in this difficult world. So thank you to our audience. I'm going to pass back to Shani now. It's been a huge privilege, as it always is, to chair one of these discussions. I've learned such a lot. You're all wonderful, and I hope we'll be down the pub at some point to pick up the threads of this. Shani, back to you.
I just wanted to pop on and to say thank you to the panel. Thank you, Glenn. Thank you, Michael, for his part in organising this as well. It's been really, really good. It's really interesting for me as well. And from the chat on YouTube, I can see a lot of people are relating to all of you. So yeah, thank you again. That's all from me. And thank you for all the attendees that have joined us, and look out for the next one. The recording will be available, so if you weren't able to stay for the whole time, you'll be able to get back into it. Okay, thank you. Okay, we're done.